We are on Domain 3, Poetry. This is Lesson 4, The Copper Beech and My Father and the Fig Tree. Our objectives for today are to identify and make inferences about figurative language used in two nature poems and to use a graphic organizer to compare and contrast two characters in a poem. Some key vocabulary for today. Allah is an Arabic word for God. Assurance is a promise. A copper beech is a large tree that can live for several hundred years and grow to a height of over 150 feet. An emblem is a symbol. Immense is extremely large. Indifferent is uncaring. Johah is a character in Palestine folktales who is known for playing tricks. Figurative language are words or phrases that mean more than their dictionary definition. Similes and metaphors are two examples of figurative language. A metaphor is a figure of speech in which words typically used to describe one thing are used to describe something else in order to suggest a likeness. And a simile is a comparison of two different things using the words like or as. Okay, we are going to read Mary Howe's The Copper Beech. The first poem is, we're actually going to read two poems today, so this is what the first one is. When beech is spelled this way, it actually refers to a kind of tree, rather than, a sandy strip of land. So this poem is by a woman named Mary Howe, and is who is writing about an encounter in nature. So before we read her poem, let's go ahead and read her biography. Marie Howe was born in Rochester, New York in 1950. As a child, she loved to read and write. As an adult, she became a journalist and a 7th grade English teacher. While teaching, she realized her true love of poetry and spent hours reading and selecting poems for her students to read. Her passion inspired her to return to college and create art that would make hearts break open rather than close. Not long after her first book of poetry, The Good Thief, was published, Howe's brother died of AIDS-related disease, inspiring her second poetry collection, What the Living Do. Her poetry has inspired readers with its honesty and openness on diverse topics. In 2012, Marie Howe was named Poet Laureate for New York State. She writes and teaches in New York City. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to read through. Feel free to pause the video at any time to reread this poem. So this previous poem contained a lot of figurative language. Figurative language occurs when words mean more than the actual words that are used. And we've actually talked about this in a previous lesson, the difference between a simile and a metaphor. Both of them are going to compare and contrast things. Simile uses like or as, while as metaphors do not. So let's go back real quick. So you can notice that most of this has that figurative language where she's saying one thing, but she doesn't actually mean that. She's comparing it to something else. Now we're going to read another poem. This is My Father and the Fig Tree by Naomi Shihab Nye. She is also writing about an encounter in nature, and although they have different poems, they're going to be still about nature. So in this poem, you're going to hear about a character named Johah. This is a common character in Palestine folklore, and since Nye's father is Palestinian, it is likely he told her stories from his culture. As the poem notes, there are several different stories about Johah, and Nye's father changes some of the details each time he tells a story. This happens often with folk stories in various countries. While listening, you're going to try to pay attention to and hear not only about Johah, but also Nye's father and his experience with nature. Before we do that, let's go ahead and read her biography. Naomi Shihab Nye was born in March 12, 1952 in St. Louis, Missouri. As a child, she wrote poetry as soon as she could. She explains, I wrote about all the little stuff a kid could write about, amazement over things, cats, wounded squirrels found in my street, my friend who moved away, trees, teachers, my funny grandma. At that time, I wrote about my German grandma. I wouldn't meet my Palestinian grandma till I was 14. Growing up between both Ramallah, Palestine, and San Antonio, Texas, Nye experienced a contrast between two cultures, and it shapes her poetry today. Nye's books of poetry include Different Ways to Pray, Fuel, and 19 Varieties of Gazelle, which earned praise and awards. Her poetry traces her daily life from the Middle East to the American Southwest. She lives, teaches, and writes in San Antonio, Texas. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause my video for a little bit. Feel free to pause and read carefully. What is Nai's reaction to the fig she eats at age 6? She just shrugged. Based on this reaction, how much do you think she liked the fig? She thought it was okay. Remember, the shrug's like, okay, that's good, fine, I guess. That's kind of how a shrug feels. Later in stanza 2, Nai's father describes a different kind of fig than the one she has eaten. What words does her father use to describe his fig? He calls it a fig straight from earth, a gift of Allah, the largest, fattest, sweetest fig in the world. So you can see how they both have a different perception of it. So, she's saying that this fig is like, it's okay. He's saying it's, the best thing. It's the largest, the fattest, the sweetest. It's a gift from Allah, or, remember, Allah means God. It's straight up from the earth. So he's showing that appreciation for it. So what kind of tree does the character like? So in Hao's poem, she likes the copper beech, while in Nai's, he likes the fig tree. Whose story does the character tell? So Hao tells her own story, while Nai actually tells the Zhouha's folk tales. So that's a difference in comparing and contrast. How does the character show his or her feelings about the tree? This one, she sits in the tree. This one just sings about it. And what does the tree represent to the character? For Hao, it was quiet and seclusive. For Nai's father, it was as part of their childhood in their home. So now for your assessment, what you're going to do, based on what you know about each character, you're going to make an inference about which of the following he or she would most likely do from these lists. So the list is visit a library, plant a tree, tell stories to the neighbors, speak to a group of people about why they should protect the forest, and visit another country. So based on after reading Hao's poem, what would Hao most likely do of these items? And you need to explain why. You're going to do the same thing for Nai's father. Which one of these 5 items would Nai's father do and why? This is going to be your assessment. So when you are completed with that, be sure to send it to your teacher, and we will see everyone in our next lesson.